Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to a place where gold wasn't just for fancy jewelry or the occasional dental filling, but where it was so abundant, it literally became part of the scenery. Imagine, if you will, the sun setting over vast plains, casting a warm, dusty glow on structures that shimmered with an inner light, built from mud and, well, not just mud. You're trudging through the Sahel, the air thick with the scent of dry earth and something vaguely metallic. The distant sound of market chatter reaches your ears, a low hum that promises exotic goods and even more exotic stories. You're on the edge of a place so rich, so grand, it would make a modern-day billionaire blush. And here's the kicker. You probably wouldn't survive a week, what with the ancient diseases, the lack of Wi-Fi, and the genuine possibility of being mistaken for a really shiny rock. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're journeying into the heart of West Africa, to the ancient Ghana Empire, a realm often overshadowed by later, perhaps more famously documented, empires like Mali or Songhai. Yet, Ghana was the true pioneer, laying the foundations for the incredible wealth and complex societies that would follow. Think of it as the original gold standard, long before anyone even thought of central banks. Its true origins are shrouded in the mists of oral tradition, whispered down generations rather than etched in stone. Many of the earliest accounts come from Arab geographers and historians, who first encountered this powerful kingdom. They spoke of a land overflowing with gold, a place so prosperous that its rulers could afford to adorn themselves and their cities in ways that seemed almost mythical to outsiders. These early chroniclers, like al-Bakri in the 11th century, painted vivid pictures, though sometimes with a hint of awestruck exaggeration, of a king who could field an army of 200,000 warriors and whose palace was decorated with solid gold. Now, while we might take some of those numbers with a grain of salt, a very large grain, perhaps from the Saharan salt mines we'll discuss later, the core truth of Ghana's immense wealth remains undisputed. The indigenous Sonic people are credited with establishing this powerful state, likely around the 3rd to 4th century CE, though historians still argue whether its true political consolidation occurred closer to the 8th century. Imagine the early days, small settlements coalescing, driven by the need for defense and the burgeoning opportunities of nascent trade. The first rulers, according to local legends, were from the Sise Tunkara clan, believed to have supernatural powers, which, let's be honest, would make any early kingdom much easier to manage. You wouldn't argue with someone who could, theoretically, turn you into a frog, right? These early chiefs gradually exerted their influence over neighboring tribes, not necessarily through brutal conquest, but often through a combination of strategic alliances, perceived divine right, and crucially, control over key resources. The name Ghana itself was actually the title of the king, meaning warrior king, but it eventually came to refer to the entire kingdom. So when people spoke of Ghana, they were essentially saying the land of the warrior king. It's a bit like calling modern-day Britain the Queen, even after she's gone. It just stuck. The empire's rise wasn't simply a matter of a strong leader or a lucky discovery of gold. It was a complex interplay of geography, human ingenuity, and strategic positioning. Picture yourself there, watching as small bands of traders, initially carrying relatively paltry goods, slowly begin to realize the immense potential of connecting the rich resources of the sub-Saharan region with the bustling markets of North Africa and beyond. The Sahara Desert, seemingly an impenetrable barrier, actually became a superhighway for commerce. But that's a story for our next section. For now, simply feel the ancient earth beneath your feet, imagine the early whispers of a burgeoning kingdom, and prepare to be lulled into the quiet majesty of a forgotten empire built on the shimmer of gold. It's a bit like discovering that your grandmother's dusty old attic actually contains a treasure map. Except, in this case, the treasure was real, and it was everywhere. As you settle deeper into this historical journey, let's consider how this nascent kingdom, Ghana, truly began to shine. It wasn't just about having gold, it was about moving it. Imagine standing at the edge of the vast, daunting Sahara Desert. For centuries, this seemingly impassable sea of sand had been a formidable barrier, isolating the rich resources of West Africa from the bustling markets of North Africa and the Mediterranean. But where some saw an obstacle, others, the intrepid merchants of the age, saw opportunity. They saw a superhighway, albeit one made of shifting dunes and demanding extreme resilience. This is where the magic, or rather, the logistics, of the trans-Saharan trade routes comes into play. These routes weren't just single paths. They were a sprawling network, like ancient interstate highways, crisscrossing thousands of miles of scorching desert. The key to navigating this brutal landscape? Camels. Before the introduction of camels, which historians believe became widespread in the Sahara around the 3rd to 5th centuries CE, trade was incredibly limited and arduous, relying on slower, less resilient pack animals like donkeys or human porters. But camels, with their incredible ability to store water, endure harsh temperatures, and carry heavy loads, sometimes up to 500 pounds, revolutionized desert travel. They were the original SUVs of the Sahara, only much more cantankerous and with less air conditioning. You'd probably be riding one, swaying gently with its ungainly gait, feeling the rhythmic creak of its saddle and the immense, quiet vastness around you. The two most vital commodities flowing along these dusty arteries were gold from the south and salt from the north. Gold, as you can imagine, was the ultimate luxury, desired across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond for coinage, jewelry, and royal adornment. It was the hard currency of the ancient world. But salt? You might think, salt? Really? That's boring. Ah, but for the people of West Africa, salt was literally life itself. In a hot climate, where sweating was a way of life, salt was crucial for preserving food and, more importantly, for basic human survival. It was as valuable, if not more so, than gold in many regions. Imagine craving a potato chip so badly you'd trade a gold nugget for it. Well, maybe not quite, but the sentiment was similar. You had people in the rainforest regions to the south who had abundant gold but no salt, while the Saharan regions to the north had massive salt deposits but no gold. It was a perfect, divinely orchestrated economic mismatch. The Ghana Empire strategically positioned itself right in the middle of these vital trade flows, acting as the ultimate middleman. They didn't necessarily own all the gold mines directly, but they controlled the trade routes to them and, crucially, the towns where the exchanges happened. Every ounce of gold leaving the south and every slab of salt entering it passed through their territory, and they collected taxes on everything. Think of it as a very effective, very ancient toll booth system. Except instead of paying with spare change, you were paying with a chunk of your precious cargo. This control allowed the kings of Ghana to amass immense wealth, making them incredibly powerful. This economic dominance wasn't just about collecting tolls. It also provided security for the merchants, ensuring safe passage through their lands, which, as you can imagine, was a huge selling point when you're carrying a camel train full of incredibly valuable stuff across dangerous terrain. Historians still argue whether the Ghana Empire actively encouraged the spread of Islam among the traders, or simply tolerated it for the economic benefits it brought. Either way, the trade brought not just goods, but also ideas, cultures, and religions across the desert. You can almost hear the soft padding of camel hooves on the sand, the rustle of their elaborate saddles, and the distant, echoing calls of the caravanners. The air is dry, but there's a persistent, almost sweet scent of exotic spices mingling with the dust. Perhaps you catch a glimpse of a merchant, his face swathed in cloth against the sun, carefully inspecting a block of salt, gleaming white against the deep bronze of his skin. This wasn't just commerce, it was a way of life, a delicate dance between supply and demand, forged in the crucible of the world's largest desert. The sheer logistical feat of organizing these caravans, supplying them, protecting them, and then taxing them, speaks volumes about the administrative sophistication of the Ghana Empire. It was far from a simple collection of tribes. It was a well-oiled, gold-generating machine. With the wealth of the trans-Saharan trade pouring in, the Ghana Empire needed a place to consolidate its power, conduct its business, and truly display its immense riches. This central hub was the legendary city of Kumbi Saleh. Imagine a city, not of towering stone skyscrapers, but of sprawling, vibrant mud brick architecture, stretching across the dusty landscape. This wasn't just a single city. It was effectively a dual city, two distinct urban centers separated by about 6 miles, each serving a unique purpose, almost like having a twin sibling who does all the boring administrative work while you get to handle the fun, flashy stuff. On one side, you had the bustling, chaotic, and incredibly diverse Muslim quarter. This was the commercial heart, a magnet for traders from across North Africa and the Middle East. You're walking through narrow, winding alleyways, the air thick with the scent of spices, the clang of blacksmiths, and the chatter of a dozen different languages. Here, you'd find permanent stone houses, mosques with minarets reaching for the sky, and scribes diligently recording transactions in Arabic. It was a cosmopolitan melting pot, a place where ideas and goods flowed as freely as the water from the communal wells. Think of it as an ancient, slightly less sanitized version of a modern-day international airport terminal, only with more camels and fewer duty-free shops. These foreign merchants brought not just their wares but also their culture, their religion, and their administrative practices, leaving an indelible mark on the empire. Across the 6 miles, connected by a well-trod path, was the royal quarter, known as El Gaba. This was the seat of the Ghanaian king, his court, and the indigenous Sonic population who practiced their traditional animistic beliefs. Here, the architecture might have been simpler in form, mainly large, round huts with domed roofs, but don't let that fool you. These structures were often far more elaborate on the inside, and crucially, they were the backdrop for displays of astonishing wealth. This was where the gold, the true source of the empire's power and mystique, was showcased. Al-Bakri, the 11th century Arab geographer, famously described the king's court, stating that the monarch, adorned in gold, would receive visitors seated in a pavilion around which stood 10 horses covered with gold-embroidered cloths. Behind him were 10 pages holding shields and swords, also decorated with gold. Imagine the sheer opulence. It was the ultimate flex, long before Instagram was invented. The king's palace, while not necessarily a towering fortress in the European sense, was nevertheless the symbolic and political heart of the empire. It was surrounded by a massive fence, protecting the royal family and their vast treasury. Inside, you might find courtyards where legal disputes were settled, grand halls where important decisions were made, and most importantly, storerooms brimming with gold nuggets, the true reserves of the kingdom's power. This gold wasn't just decorative, it was the ultimate strategic asset. The king maintained a monopoly on all gold nuggets found in his territory, allowing the public only access to gold dust for trade. This brilliant system ensured that the king always held the upper hand in the gold market, controlling supply and maintaining the metal's immense value. You couldn't just wander into the wilderness and pick up a shiny chunk. If you did, it legally belonged to the king. A bit inconvenient if you found a really big one, right? Life in Kumbi Saleh, especially in the royal quarter, revolved around the king and the elaborate ceremonies that reinforced his divine authority. The king was seen not just as a ruler, but as a semi-divine figure, a mediator between the human and spiritual worlds. This belief system provided immense stability and legitimacy to his rule. You'd witness processions, formal audiences, and rituals designed to impress and awe both his subjects and visiting dignitaries. These were carefully choreographed events, emphasizing the king's power and the empire's wealth, further cementing Ghana's reputation as a rich and formidable kingdom. Historians still argue whether the coexistence of the Muslim and animist quarters was a testament to religious tolerance or simply pragmatic economic separation. Either way, it created a vibrant, complex urban landscape where different worlds intersected daily, driven by the lure of gold and the necessities of trade. Now that we've glimpsed the shimmering splendor of Kumbi Saleh, let's zoom in a little closer and explore what life was actually like for the average person living within the Ghana Empire. You might imagine everyone bathed in gold dust, but for most, Daily existence was more practical, grounded in the rhythms of agriculture and community. You'd wake with the sun, the air already warming, perhaps to the distant bleating of goats or the quiet clatter of pottery. Your home would likely be a simple, round mud brick dwelling with a thatched roof, cool in the shade and providing welcome respite from the intense West African sun. These homes, while basic, were expertly designed for the climate, often clustered together to form tight-knit villages and compounds. Farming was the backbone of society, just as it was in most ancient civilizations. The fertile lands around the Senegal and Niger rivers, though seasonal, allowed for the cultivation of staple crops. You'd be busy tending to fields of millet and sorghum, hardy grains that formed the basis of their diet. Imagine the rhythmic thud of pestles pounding grain into flour, the primary ingredient for thick porridges or flatbreads cooked over open fires. Beyond grains, they cultivated beans, rice, and a variety of root crops. You might also find yourself gathering wild fruits or tending to small plots of vegetables, supplementing the main harvest. It wasn't exactly a buffet, but it was sustenance, ensuring the population was fed, which, in historical terms, is a pretty good achievement for an empire. Livestock also played a crucial role. You'd see herds of cattle, sheep, and goats grazing in communal pastures. These animals provided not just meat and milk, but also valuable hides for clothing and tools, and dung for fertilizer. For many, a healthy herd was a sign of wealth and status, a bit like having a fancy car collection, but far more useful. Caring for these animals, leading them to water, and protecting them from predators would be a significant part of your day. And while we joke about the lack of modern conveniences, imagine the quiet satisfaction of a meal prepared from ingredients you helped grow or raise, eaten under the vast, star-filled African sky. No Uber Eats back then, but also no delivery fees. Social structure was generally hierarchical, though perhaps less rigid than in some European feudal systems. At the top was the powerful king and his court, followed by nobles, religious leaders, and skilled artisans. The vast majority of the population were farmers, organized into extended family units and clans, which formed the basic social fabric. Family was paramount, providing a safety net and defining your place in the world. Decisions were often made communally within the family or village elders, fostering a strong sense of community and shared responsibility. If your roof needed mending, your neighbors would likely lend a hand, and you'd reciprocate when their time came. A quirky tidbit that often surprises people is the emphasis on oral tradition and storytelling. While writing in Arabic was common among the Muslim traders and scholars, the indigenous sonning culture relied heavily on griots, professional storytellers, praise singers, and poets to preserve history, genealogies, and cultural knowledge. You wouldn't learn history from dusty books. You'd learn it from a captivating performance around a fire, passed down verbatim through generations. Imagine a griot recounting tales of ancient kings and epic battles, their voice weaving magic in the twilight. It's a bit like having your entire historical archive in human form, which, while beautiful, does make version control a nightmare for historians. Historians still debate the precise balance of power between the indigenous animistic beliefs and the growing influence of Islam in daily life. While the king maintained his traditional religious practices in the royal quarter, the presence of a thriving Muslim community in Kumbi Saleh's commercial district suggests a remarkable degree of religious coexistence and, perhaps, mutual respect, driven largely by economic necessity. You might see a Muslim merchant praying 5 times a day, while his Sonic trading partner offered libations to ancestral spirits. This fascinating blend of cultures and beliefs truly defined the unique character of the Ghana Empire. It was a place where tradition and change rubbed shoulders, often comfortably, sometimes uneasily, but always profoundly. Now, let's talk about the glittering heart of the Ghana Empire's prosperity: gold. Not just in small, decorative pieces, but in quantities that truly boggle the modern mind. Imagine living in a place where the earth itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. The gold didn't just appear out of thin air, of course. It came from specific mining regions to the south of the empire, primarily Bambuk and Bure, located in what is now parts of modern-day Senegal and Mali. These areas were rich in alluvial gold dust and nuggets found in riverbeds and deposits, washed down from eroded veins over millennia. You might picture deep, dark mine shafts like those in a European coal mine, but the gold extraction methods were often much simpler, and arguably, far more sustainable for the environment. Much of it was surface mining or shallow pit digging, where local people, primarily farmers during the dry season, would dig into the earth to extract the precious metal. They would then pan for gold in riverbeds or dig shallow pits, often just a few meters deep, to reach the gold-bearing sands. It was back-breaking work, certainly, but the reward was tangible. Imagine the excitement of unearthing a nugget, a solid piece of glittering wealth that could change your fortunes, or at least buy a lot of salt. The unique relationship Ghana had with this gold was fascinating. The king, as we touched on earlier, maintained a strict royal monopoly on gold nuggets. This was a stroke of genius, preventing inflation and ensuring that the king held immense power. All gold dust was allowed for trade and circulation, but any nugget found belonged exclusively to the king. This meant that while everyday transactions could happen with gold dust, the really big pieces, the impressive chunks, were held in the royal treasury. This system effectively controlled the market, keeping gold's value high and the king's personal wealth immeasurable. It also served as a very visible demonstration of his power, a tangible, shining symbol of his dominion over the land and its riches. You wouldn't want to be caught trying to sneak a nugget past the royal tax collectors, I assure you. It was a bit like trying to smuggle a small, very shiny, and incredibly heavy car through airport security. Just don't. This abundance of gold wasn't just for show. It fueled the empire's economy, allowing the king to maintain a formidable army, support his elaborate court, and fund public works. It attracted merchants from far and wide, ensuring a constant flow of other valuable goods, textiles, horses, copper, and manufactured goods into the empire. The gold also served as an international currency, facilitating trade across vast distances and connecting West Africa to the global economy of the time. The very concept of cash, as we understand it, in a sense, was rooted in this tangible, beautiful metal. A quirky detail that highlights the sheer quantity of gold is that some historical accounts mention that the king would even use gold for non-traditional purposes, like tethering his horses with gold chains, or having solid gold weights for scales. Again, likely a touch of exaggeration from foreign chroniclers, but it speaks to the perception of limitless wealth. Imagine walking through a stable and seeing the horses tied with gold. You'd probably trip over your own jaw. Historians still argue whether the local gold miners were truly compensated fairly for their labor, or if the royal monopoly effectively extracted wealth from them for the benefit of the central power. While the system provided stability and security, the power dynamic was clearly in favor of the king. Nevertheless, the symbiotic relationship between the miners, the traders, and the central authority of Ghana created a powerful economic engine that powered one of Africa's greatest medieval empires. The echo of those hammers on rock, the shimmer of newly found nuggets, and the endless stream of gold dust flowing into the royal coffers are all part of the quiet, golden hum of this incredible history. Now, imagine you're a merchant, perhaps from North Africa, arriving at Kumbi Saleh, laden with goods after weeks of arduous travel across the Sahara. You have your fine cloths, your copper, perhaps some dried fruits, and a strong desire to acquire that shimmering gold. But how do you actually conduct business in a place where direct negotiation might be complicated by language barriers, cultural differences, and a deep-seated desire for privacy on the part of the gold producers? This is where one of the most fascinating and peculiar aspects of the Ghana Empire's trade comes into play: the silent barter system. This wasn't just a quaint custom. It was a highly effective and ingenious method of trade that had evolved over centuries, specifically designed for situations where direct contact between parties was either culturally forbidden or logistically impossible. You wouldn't haggle or argue. You would simply lay out your goods and wait. The process, as described by Arab chroniclers, was almost ritualistic. Imagine the scenario. You, the foreign merchant, arrive at a designated trading spot, often a specific riverbank or clearing deep in the forest, far from the actual gold mines. You carefully arrange your goods, say, blocks of salt or rolls of beautiful fabric, in neat piles. Once your display is complete, you beat a drum to signal your presence, then retreat several miles away, out of sight. Then, the local gold miners, often Sonic or Wangara people who wish to remain anonymous and protect the location of their gold sources, would emerge. They would approach your piles of goods, inspect them, and then, in turn, place an amount of gold dust next to each pile that they felt was a fair exchange. Once they had made their offers, they too would retreat, disappearing back into the dense foliage or across the river. You, the foreign merchant, would then return. You'd examine the gold dust. If you were satisfied with the amount, you would take the gold and beat your drum again, signifying your acceptance. The local miners would then return to collect the goods you had left. If, however, you were not satisfied, you would leave both your goods and the gold dust untouched, retreat once more and wait. This signaled that you wanted more gold. The local miners would then add more gold, and the process would repeat until both parties were content. No words exchanged, no haggling, just a quiet, almost meditative dance of supply and demand. It sounds utterly bizarre, like a really slow-paced, high-stakes game of charades, but it worked. This system was incredibly efficient for its time, fostering trust through its transparency and allowing trade to flourish between groups who might otherwise have had little contact or mutual understanding. It also provided crucial protection for the gold sources, keeping their locations secret and minimizing the risk of outsiders trying to seize them. It ensured that the gold producers remained largely self-sufficient and insulated from direct foreign interference, allowing the Ghana Empire to maintain its control over the overall trade flow, even if it didn't directly control the miners themselves. A quirky detail is that some historians suggest the silent barter also helped to prevent disputes and violence, as there was no direct negotiation that could lead to misunderstandings or heated arguments. It was a premeditated, non-confrontational form of commerce, a bit like ordering online, but with more steps and significantly more dust. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for the silent barter was solely the protection of gold sources, or if it also served as a means for the indigenous people to maintain their cultural autonomy and distance from the foreign, often Muslim, traders. Regardless of the exact motivations, it stands as a unique testament to the ingenuity and adaptability of the people of the Ghana Empire, a silent symphony of exchange that built an empire. Beyond the shimmer of gold and the silent exchanges of the marketplace, life in the Ghana Empire was deeply interwoven with its spiritual beliefs. You'd find yourself immersed in a world where the natural environment was alive with spirits, where ancestors watched over the living, and where the line between the sacred and the mundane was beautifully blurred. For the indigenous Sonic people, their traditional religion was a vibrant, animistic system, fundamentally different from the monotheistic faiths emerging from the north. Imagine walking through a village and seeing small shrines dedicated to various spirits. Spirits of the river, spirits of the trees, spirits of the fertile earth that provided their crops. These weren't abstract concepts. They were tangible presences that influenced daily life, harvest yields, and even personal well-being. Animism posits that everything, rocks, rivers, animals, plants, and even man-made objects, possesses a distinct spiritual essence. So, when you gathered water from a well, you weren't just drawing H2O. You were interacting with the spirit of that well, offering a silent thanks, perhaps, for its bounty. It instilled a profound respect for nature and the interconnectedness of all things. It's a bit like living in a perpetual Disney movie, but instead of talking animals, you have talking everything. Central to their spiritual practice was the veneration of ancestors. The elders and those who had passed on were not gone, but simply transitioned to another realm, still actively involved in the lives of their descendants. You would offer libations, perform rituals, and consult diviners to seek their guidance and ensure their continued blessing. These ancestors were seen as powerful intermediaries between the living and the overarching creator spirit. This strong connection to lineage and history provided a deep sense of identity and continuity, reminding everyone of their place within the grand tapestry of generations. It created a society where wisdom was highly valued, and respect for elders was paramount. Another key aspect was the role of spiritual specialists, diviners, healers, and ritual leaders. These individuals held significant influence, interpreting omens, performing healing ceremonies, and mediating between the human and spirit worlds. If you were ill, you wouldn't just go to a doctor. You'd seek out a healer who understood the spiritual imbalance causing your affliction. If you faced a difficult decision, you might consult a diviner to understand the will of the spirits or your ancestors. These practices provided comfort, explained the unexplainable, and maintained social cohesion by reinforcing shared beliefs and values. They were the original life coaches, but with more feathers and fewer PowerPoint presentations. The king himself played a central role in these religious practices. As we touched on, he was not just a political leader but also seen as a sacred figure, the chief spiritual leader of his people. His well-being was intrinsically linked to the well-being of the empire. He performed crucial rituals to ensure good harvests, to bring rain, and to protect the kingdom from harm. This spiritual authority was a significant source of his power and legitimacy, reinforcing the idea that his rule was divinely sanctioned. A quirky, fringe tidbit about the practices of the region, though perhaps not specifically Ghana, involves the use of fetishes and amulets. Many people would carry small objects, often natural items or specially crafted charms, believed to contain protective spirits or magical properties. You might have seen someone wearing a small leather pouch around their neck, containing a dried herb or a piece of wood, meant to ward off evil or bring good fortune. These were personal spiritual tools, providing a sense of agency and protection in a world where forces beyond human control were ever present. Historians still argue whether the complexity and sophistication of these indigenous spiritual systems were fully understood or accurately documented by the early Arab chroniclers, who often viewed them through a monotheistic lens. It's likely that much of the nuance and depth of these beliefs was lost in translation or simply not recognized by outsiders. Nevertheless, it's clear that for the people of Ghana, their spiritual world was as real and tangible as the gold that enriched their empire. It was a worldview that offered meaning, comfort, and a profound connection to the land and to those who had walked it before them. As the Ghana Empire flourished, drawing in merchants and travelers from across the vast Sahara, it wasn't just goods and gold that made their way across the dunes. Ideas, technologies, and crucially, Islam began to filter into the kingdom, slowly but surely shaping its trajectory. You wouldn't witness a sudden, dramatic conversion of the entire populace, but rather a gradual, almost osmotic absorption of a new faith. Imagine, for a moment, the bustling Muslim quarter of Kumbi Saleh, which we touched upon earlier. Here, the North African merchants, who were overwhelmingly Muslim, established their homes, their businesses, and most importantly, their mosques. You'd hear the rhythmic call to prayer echoing across the dusty plains 5 times a day, a sound entirely alien to the traditional animistic practices of the indigenous Sani. These merchants weren't just traders, they were cultural ambassadors, bringing with them not just their faith, but also the Arabic language, new legal systems, advanced administrative practices, and a vast body of scholarly knowledge from the wider Islamic world. The King of Ghana, while maintaining his traditional spiritual role among his own people, adopted a remarkably pragmatic approach to the growing Muslim presence. He understood the immense economic benefits these traders brought. Therefore, he not only tolerated their presence but actively provided them with a designated quarter, complete with their own judges and religious leaders. This was a shrewd political move, ensuring the continued flow of commerce and the stability of his economy. You wouldn't find forced conversions or religious persecution. Instead, you'd see a fascinating, almost harmonious, coexistence. It was a bit like having a foreign exchange student who brings delicious new recipes, and you decide to build them a whole separate kitchen. Everyone wins. While the common Sani people largely held onto their traditional beliefs for a long time, the elite and educated classes, particularly those involved in trade and administration, began to adopt Islam. Why? Because it offered tangible advantages. Learning Arabic opened up the world of trans-Saharan trade even further, allowing for easier communication with Muslim partners. Adopting Islamic legal principles, particularly in commercial disputes, could streamline business. And politically, aligning with the dominant faith of the wealthy North African trade network offered prestige and access to a broader diplomatic sphere. It was, in many ways, a logical choice for those who operated on a larger international stage. The gradual nature of Islam's spread in Ghana is a key point. It wasn't spread by conquest in the early days, but by commerce and peaceful interaction. Scholars and Sufi mystics sometimes accompanied the trade caravans, slowly introducing the tenets of Islam to new communities. You might encounter a traveling scholar, patiently explaining the 5 pillars of Islam to a curious local, perhaps over a shared meal. This peaceful diffusion allowed for a unique blend of cultures, where Islamic practices sometimes absorbed local customs, and vice versa. A quirky detail that highlights this blend. Some accounts suggest that even the Ghanaian kings, while maintaining their traditional religion for public display and to legitimize their rule over the Sani, might have privately embraced aspects of Islam or at least employed Muslim advisors and scribes. This two-tiered religious system allowed them to straddle both worlds effectively. Historians still argue whether the influence of Islam ultimately weakened the traditional animist practices of the empire, or if it simply coexisted until later external pressures became too great. What is clear, however, is that the arrival of Islam transformed Ghana from a purely local power into a kingdom deeply embedded in the wider medieval global network, connected not just by gold, but by faith and knowledge. As the Ghana Empire solidified its power and wealth, a distinct architectural style emerged, reflecting both its indigenous traditions and the influences brought by its foreign contacts. You wouldn't find monumental stone pyramids or vast Roman-style colosseums here. Instead, imagine structures built from the very earth beneath your feet, sculpted from mud and adorned with a surprising touch of brilliance. Mud brick and gold-adorned buildings. The primary building material was adobe, or sun-dried mud bricks. This was a logical choice for the climate and available resources. You'd see skilled builders mixing clay, sand, and straw, often reinforced with local plant fibers, then pressing it into molds and leaving the bricks to bake hard under the relentless West African sun. These bricks, once cured, were surprisingly durable and provided excellent insulation against the intense heat of the day and the cooler temperatures of the night. Imagine the rhythmic thud of mallets compacting the earth, the soft murmur of instructions, and the steady progression of walls rising from the ground. It was a testament to ingenious local engineering, perfectly adapted to its environment. The general impression of the cities and towns within the empire, especially outside the purely commercial quarter of Kumbi Saleh, would be one of organic growth, with buildings often merging seamlessly with the landscape. Homes for the common people were typically round, single-room huts with domed or conical thatched roofs, designed to maximize airflow and shed water during the brief rainy season. These weren't cramped. Often, several such huts would be arranged around a central courtyard, forming a family compound, a bit like a miniature village within a village. You'd find cooking areas, sleeping quarters, and perhaps a small shrine all within this enclosed, private space. However, in the royal quarter of El Gaba, and certainly within the king's own complex, the mud brick architecture took on a more elaborate form. While the basic material remained the same, the scale and ornamentation were significantly grander. Arab chroniclers, though sometimes prone to exaggeration, spoke of a royal palace that was not merely large, but also decorated with gold. Now, this doesn't mean solid gold walls, as charming as that image might be. More likely, it refers to architectural elements inlaid with gold leaf, gilded accents, or perhaps even intricate gold artifacts used as decorative fixtures. Imagine the sun catching these golden embellishments, making the buildings shimmer and glow against the deep red-brown of the earth. It would have been a truly awe-inspiring sight, a visible manifestation of the king's boundless wealth. You'd probably be squinting, wondering if the heat was making you see things, only to realize, nope, that really is gold. The mosques in the Muslim quarter of Kumbi Saleh also showcased a blend of local and imported architectural styles. While still primarily constructed from mud brick, they often incorporated design elements typical of North African and Andalusian mosques, such as minarets from which the call to prayer would issue. These minarets, reaching skyward, would have stood in stark contrast to the surrounding domed huts, symbolizing the presence of a new faith and a connection to a wider world. It was a fascinating architectural dialogue between tradition and external influence. A quirky detail that reflects the pragmatic ingenuity of mud brick construction is its ability to be constantly repaired and refurbished. Unlike stone, which requires specialized tools and skills for repair, mud structures could be maintained by local people, simply by applying new layers of mud plaster. It meant buildings were always breathing and adaptable, almost living entities that could be continually renewed. Historians still argue about the precise techniques used to apply and maintain gold decoration on mud brick surfaces, given the challenges of adhesion and preservation in that climate. However, the evidence from later West African empires, which built on Ghana's foundations, suggests sophisticated methods were indeed developed. The quiet hum of construction, the steady hand of the artisan, and the occasional glint of gold in the afternoon sun all paint a picture of a flourishing empire, literally built from the ground up. No empire, no matter how rich or powerful, can maintain its stability without a strong hand to enforce order, defend its borders, and project its authority. For the Ghana Empire, this essential backbone was its military prowess. You wouldn't find legions of highly trained, identically armored soldiers like the Romans. Instead, imagine a flexible, effective fighting force perfectly suited to the terrain and the strategic needs of the empire, largely comprised of well-equipped infantry and, crucially, a formidable cavalry. The King of Ghana, the Ghana meaning warrior king, was naturally the supreme commander of this army. His ability to field a significant number of warriors was a key factor in his regional dominance. Arab chroniclers like al-Bakri, as you might recall, spoke of an army numbering in the hundreds of thousands, a figure that is almost certainly an exaggeration. Think more along the lines of a strong standing army supplemented by a much larger conscripted force during times of need. Regardless of the exact numbers, the impression left on outsiders was one of overwhelming strength. You'd certainly think twice before trying to argue with a king who could, theoretically, summon an entire city's worth of armed individuals. The core of the Ghanaian army was its infantry. These warriors were likely drawn from the Sonic population and neighboring allied tribes. They were armed with a variety of traditional West African weapons: spears, javelins, bows and arrows, and short swords. Imagine a phalanx of these warriors, their shields locked, advancing across the savannah, their movements coordinated by the beat of drums and the calls of their leaders. Their effectiveness came from their knowledge of the local terrain, their discipline, and their sheer numbers. They were the muscle of the empire, capable of defending trade routes, suppressing internal rebellions, and engaging in skirmishes with rival groups. However, the real showstoppers, the ancient equivalent of a tank division, were the cavalry. Horses, though not native to the region in large numbers, were imported from North Africa via the trans-Saharan trade routes. They were incredibly valuable, both as beasts of burden and, even more so, as instruments of war. A mounted warrior possessed a speed and shock value that infantry simply couldn't match. Imagine seeing a charge of Ghanaian horsemen, their horses perhaps adorned with gold-embroidered cloths, as al-Bakri suggested for the king's own horses, thundering across the plains. It would be a truly terrifying sight for any opposing force, especially those who were purely infantry-based. This cavalry allowed the Ghanaian kings to project power over vast distances, quickly respond to threats, and effectively control the lucrative trade routes that were the lifeblood of their empire. The army's primary functions were multifaceted. Firstly, defense. It protected the empire's borders from incursions by hostile tribes and rival states. Secondly, internal security. It suppressed banditry along the trade routes, ensuring the safe passage of goods and merchants, which was vital for the economy. And thirdly, enforcement of royal authority. It ensured that taxes were collected, and that various vassal states and tribute-paying communities remained loyal to the king. A quirky detail often overlooked is that the military also played a role in maintaining the king's sacred status. The display of arms might reinforce the perception of his divine power and invincibility. It was a clear message. You might respect the king's spiritual authority, but you'd also respect his very real army. Historians still argue about the exact composition and command structure of the Ghanaian army, particularly how it integrated different tribal levies and the balance between professional soldiers and seasonal conscripts. What is undeniable, however, is that this military, particularly its cavalry component, was instrumental in establishing and maintaining the Ghana Empire's preeminence in West Africa for centuries. It was the quiet, disciplined force that allowed the gold to flow and the empire to thrive. Every thriving society, no matter how ancient, needs a system to maintain order, resolve disputes, and ensure a modicum of justice. In the Ghana Empire, you would find a fascinating blend of traditional customs, royal decrees, and, increasingly, the influence of Islamic law, particularly in the commercial centers. This created a nuanced framework for legal and justice. Imagine a typical scene in a Ghanaian village: a dispute over land boundaries, perhaps, or a disagreement about livestock. These issues would most likely be handled at the local level, by village elders or community leaders. These individuals, respected for their wisdom and experience, would act as mediators and judges, drawing upon established customary laws that had been passed down through generations. These laws were often unwritten, based on precedent and communal understanding, focused on restoring harmony within the community rather than strictly punishing offenders. It was a bit like your grandmother arbitrating a fight between siblings. The goal was less about who was right, and more about everyone getting along again. You'd present your case, listen to others, and eventually, a decision would be rendered, often with an emphasis on restitution or reconciliation. However, for more serious crimes, or for disputes that couldn't be resolved locally, matters would ascend to the king's court in Kumbi Saleh. The king was the ultimate judicial authority, the final arbiter of justice within his realm. Arab chroniclers described a formal court where the king, seated in his opulent pavilion, would hear cases. He was assisted by Muslim jurists, particularly for cases involving foreign merchants or issues related to Islamic law. This highlights the practical integration of different legal systems. For a local Sani, the king's judgment would be rooted in traditional beliefs and his perceived divine authority. For a Muslim trader, it might incorporate Sharia principles. This dual system allowed for flexibility and ensured that both indigenous and foreign populations felt that justice was accessible, even if it looked different depending on who you were. Punishments in the Ghana Empire, like in many ancient societies, could be severe, though focused on maintaining social order. For minor offenses, restitution or communal service might be ordered. For more serious crimes, particularly those against the state or royal authority, penalties could include corporal punishment, enslavement, or even execution. However, specific accounts of these punishments are scarce in early sources, often relying on the generalized observations of foreign visitors. One of the more peculiar, fringe tidbits mentioned by al-Bakri involved a form of trial by ordeal to determine guilt or innocence in certain cases, where the accused might be given a bitter drink. If they vomited, they were considered innocent. It's certainly a unique judicial process, not recommended for modern legal systems, and probably resulted in a lot of upset stomachs, innocent or not. The concept of justice was deeply intertwined with the prevailing spiritual beliefs. In the animistic system, an oath sworn before ancestors or spirits held immense weight. For Muslims, oaths sworn on the Quran were similarly binding. This spiritual dimension added a layer of gravity to legal proceedings, as there was a belief that divine forces would ultimately ensure truth and fairness. Historians still argue about the precise extent to which Islamic legal principles permeated the indigenous justice system, particularly outside the major trading centers. While Muslim judges certainly operated within the commercial quarter, the vast majority of the population likely continued to adhere to customary law administered by their local leaders. The quiet hum of a village discussion, the solemn pronouncements of the elders, and the ultimate, undeniable authority of the king all contributed to a complex tapestry of justice in the Ghana Empire. It was a system that, for centuries, helped keep the peace in a bustling, multicultural realm. Even the most powerful empires eventually faced their twilight, and the Ghana Empire, despite its immense wealth and military strength, was no exception. Its decline wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic event, but rather a slow, gradual weakening, a process that saw its power erode from within and its authority challenged from without. You might imagine the subtle cracks appearing in the foundations, a faint tremor that eventually leads to a shift in the landscape of power. One of the primary external pressures came from the Almoravids. These were a puritanical Islamic reform movement that emerged from the Sahara in the 11th century. A highly motivated and disciplined group of Berber tribesmen from what is now Mauritania and Morocco. They were fiercely dedicated to spreading their strict interpretation of Islam, and they saw the Ghana Empire as a wealthy, but religiously impure, target. They launched a series of jihads, or holy wars, pushing southwards. Imagine a relentless, zealous force, driven by faith and a desire for expansion, knocking at the empire's doors. While the exact nature and extent of the Almoravid impact are still debated by historians, it's clear they exerted significant military and economic pressure. Their sieges of Ghanaian towns, particularly the prolonged siege of Kumbi Saleh itself, would have been devastating. The disruption of trade routes, the constant warfare, and the strain on resources would have taken a heavy toll on the empire's economy, which relied so heavily on the smooth flow of trans-Saharan commerce. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the constant watchfulness for raiding parties, the fear of caravans being intercepted. This was a long, exhausting war of attrition, not a single decisive battle. Beyond military conflict, the Almoravid campaigns may have also contributed to environmental degradation. As populations were displaced and traditional farming practices disrupted by conflict, pressure on fertile lands and water sources would have increased. Overgrazing by large herds, particularly in semi-arid regions, could lead to desertification, further exacerbating the challenges of sustaining a large population and its agriculture. Imagine the once fertile fields slowly turning to dust, adding to the hardship. Internal factors also played a significant role in Ghana's weakening. As the central authority struggled with external threats, various vassal states and tributary chiefdoms, which had long paid homage and taxes to the Ghanaian king, began to assert their independence. They saw an opportunity to break free from the king's grip, leading to internal rebellions and fragmentation. It was a bit like trying to keep all your perfectly arranged dominoes standing while someone is shaking the table. The empire, once a tightly controlled entity, began to unravel at the edges. Another often cited factor is the shift in trade routes. While Ghana had expertly controlled the vital north-south gold-salt trade for centuries, new, more easterly routes began to emerge. As new gold fields were discovered further east, particularly in regions that would later become part of the Mali Empire, the focus of trade slowly shifted away from Ghana. Merchants, ever pragmatic, followed the most profitable paths. This gradual rerouting of commerce would have significantly reduced the tax revenues flowing into the Ghanaian treasury, weakening its economic foundation without a single sword being drawn. A quirky, fringe tidbit suggests that the very prosperity of Ghana might have contributed to its decline. The immense wealth could have led to internal complacency or a reluctance to adapt quickly enough to changing geopolitical and economic realities. Historians still argue about the precise timeline and the relative importance of each of these factors in Ghana's eventual collapse. Was it primarily the Almoravid invasions, the internal fragmentation, or the shifting trade routes that delivered the final blow? The answer is likely a complex interplay of all three, culminating in the dismemberment of the empire into smaller, independent chiefdoms. You can almost hear the soft, mournful sigh of a once mighty empire as its golden age slowly, inexorably, faded into history. Though the Ghana Empire eventually faded from its former glory, its story didn't simply end with its decline. Like a grand old tree that falls, it left behind fertile ground and scattered seeds, profoundly influencing the political, economic, and cultural landscape of West Africa for centuries to come. You wouldn't see its direct successor emerge overnight, but rather a series of new powers that rose, learned, and built upon the foundations Ghana had so meticulously laid. This is its enduring legacy and influence. The most direct and prominent beneficiary of Ghana's decline was the Mali Empire. Emerging in the 13th century, Mali rose to become an even larger and wealthier empire, often explicitly drawing lessons from Ghana's successes and failures. Its founders, particularly the legendary Sundiata Keita, adopted and adapted many of the administrative structures, trade networks, and even aspects of the military organization that Ghana had pioneered. They recognized the immense value of controlling the trans-Saharan gold trade and continued to exploit the very gold fields that had enriched Ghana. It's a bit like a highly successful startup paving the way for an even bigger tech giant to learn from its blueprint. Crucially, the Mali Empire, and later the Songhai Empire, inherited and expanded upon the Islamic influence that had begun to take root in Ghana. While Ghana's kings largely maintained their traditional beliefs, Mali's rulers, most famously Mansa Musa, were devout Muslims who actively promoted Islam throughout their vast territories. This religious continuity can be traced directly back to the tolerant environment fostered by Ghana, where Muslim scholars and merchants were welcomed and their faith allowed to flourish. The quiet calls to prayer in Kumbi Saleh's merchant quarter were the seeds that blossomed into the great Islamic learning centers of Timbuktu and Jen under Mali and Songhai. Economically, Ghana's mastery of the trans-Saharan trade routes provided a template for subsequent empires. The understanding of the gold-salt exchange, the logistics of camel caravans, and the importance of secure trade corridors were all lessons hard-won by Ghana and readily applied by its successors. Even as trade routes shifted, the fundamental principles of West African commerce were established by this pioneering empire. You can almost trace the lines on a map, seeing how the paths blazed by Ghanaian merchants became the superhighways for later empires. Culturally, Ghana's legacy also lived on, though often subtly. The Sonic people, despite their empire's political fragmentation, continued to thrive and maintain their cultural identity. Their oral traditions, their animistic beliefs, and their social structures persisted, influencing the diverse tapestry of West African societies. Many of the griots you might encounter in Mali or Guinea today trace their lineage and their storytelling traditions back to the ancient courts of Ghana. It's a comforting thought, isn't it, that even when empires fall, the whispers of their past continue through the voices of their descendants. A quirky, fringe tidbit is that the very name Ghana holds such prestige that when the modern nation of Ghana gained independence from British colonial rule in 1957, its leader, Kwame Nkrumah, deliberately chose the name Ghana for the new country, despite its geographical location being hundreds of miles southeast of the historical empire's heartland. This act was a powerful symbol, linking the newly independent nation to a glorious, pre-colonial African past of wealth and sophisticated governance, deliberately rejecting colonial nomenclature. It's a testament to the enduring symbolic power of this ancient empire. Historians still argue about the precise extent of institutional transfer from Ghana to Mali. Was it a direct inheritance, or a reinvention of similar structures? Regardless, the undeniable fact is that the Ghana Empire was not just a chapter in history. It was the prologue to a rich and vibrant narrative of powerful West African states that would continue to shape the continent for centuries. Its quiet, golden hum echoes in the foundations of empires yet to come. Bringing our journey closer to the present, let's consider how the ancient Ghana Empire, a realm of silent barters and golden kings, resonates in our modern world. You might think of it as a distant, dusty memory, but its existence, its story, and its rediscovery have had tangible impacts on our understanding of African history and even on contemporary identity. These are the modern echoes of a forgotten power. For a long time, particularly during the colonial era, the rich history of West Africa was often overlooked or deliberately downplayed in Western scholarship. The narrative frequently focused on European expansion, leaving the impression that Africa had little pre-colonial history of complex states or advanced civilizations. The rediscovery and serious study of empires like Ghana, drawing from archaeological findings, the invaluable accounts of Arab chroniclers, and the enduring power of local oral traditions shattered this misconception. It revealed a continent with a vibrant past of sophisticated societies, extensive trade networks, and powerful rulers. You can almost hear the sigh of relief from historians who finally had pieces of a vast, missing puzzle. This shifted the entire global understanding of history, proving that innovation and power weren't exclusive to certain continents. The study of Ghana's history continues to be a dynamic field for archaeologists and historians. Sites like Kumbi Saleh are still being excavated, slowly revealing more secrets buried beneath centuries of sand. Each shard of pottery, each piece of metalwork, each faint outline of a mud brick wall adds another brushstroke to our understanding of daily life, trade, and power within the empire. It's a painstaking process, like trying to reconstruct a complex jigsaw puzzle with most of the pieces missing, but the dedication of these scholars continues to bring the past to life. You might imagine a team carefully brushing away layers of dust, revealing a pattern on a piece of fabric or the remnants of an ancient tool, each discovery a small victory. Beyond academia, the legacy of Ghana has played a significant role in modern African identity and nation building. As we touched upon earlier, the decision of the newly independent nation of Ghana in 1957 to adopt the name of the ancient empire was a powerful act of reclaiming history and asserting a proud, pre-colonial heritage. This symbolic connection provided a sense of continuity and inspiration for a people forging their own path after centuries of colonial rule. It was a conscious decision to look backward to move forward, grounding a modern state in the glory of an ancient one, even if the geographical boundaries didn't perfectly align. The empire's story also contributes to a broader understanding of global interconnectedness. Ghana wasn't an isolated kingdom. It was a pivotal player in a vast transcontinental trade network, linking the economies of West Africa with North Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. This challenges the notion of disconnected continents and highlights how goods, ideas, and people moved across vast distances, shaping each other's societies, long before the age of exploration. You realize just how much we take for granted the ease of international trade today, when back then, it required an almost unbelievable amount of courage and resilience from those early merchants. A quirky fringe tidbit that underscores the ongoing connection to this past is the continued respect for traditional sonic oral histories among scholars. While often viewed as less reliable than written accounts in Western historiography, these oral traditions, preserved by griots over centuries, provide unique insights and perspectives that written records simply cannot. They are a living archive, breathing life into names and events that might otherwise remain abstract. Historians still argue about the best methodologies for integrating these oral traditions with archaeological and written sources to construct a holistic and accurate picture of the Ghana Empire. The quiet hum of an ancient story, passed down through generations, still echoes in the modern search for truth. As our journey through the golden age of the Ghana Empire draws to a close, let's allow the details of its bustling markets, its silent barters, and its shimmering palaces to gently recede. You can feel the quiet satisfaction of having explored a distant past, a rich tapestry woven from trade, tradition, and a glint of gold. This is the moment to let those images soften, to allow the facts and figures to dissolve into a comforting sense of peace. Imagine the gentle breeze rustling through the dry grasses of the Sahel, carrying the faint, almost imperceptible scent of dust and distant campfires. The sun, now a deep orange, dips below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of purple and rose, a silent farewell to another day in a land that held so much history. The rhythmic sway of the camels, the soft padding of their feet across the sand, becomes a soothing cadence, lulling you into a deeper state of relaxation. You can almost hear the quiet murmurs of ancient voices, not as distinct words, but as a comforting hum, part of the timeless echo of human endeavor. Recall the simple, practical beauty of the mud brick homes, solid and enduring, offering shelter and warmth through countless nights. Think of the peaceful coexistence in Kumbi Saleh, where different cultures and beliefs found a way to share space, driven by mutual benefit and a quiet respect. There's a profound lesson in that, isn't there? That even across vast deserts and cultural divides, people found ways to connect, to exchange, and to build something remarkable together. The very air around you feels softer, imbued with the quiet wisdom of centuries. The stories of the warrior kings, the powerful gold monopoly, and the strategic importance of salt are now settling into your mind, not as rigid facts, but as hazy, pleasant memories. You're not trying to remember every detail, but simply appreciating the grand sweep of history, the quiet unfolding of an empire's rise and gentle decline. The quirks, like the trial by bitter drink or the possible golden horse chains, become whimsical anecdotes, floating gently in your consciousness, reminding you that history is often stranger and funnier than fiction. Allow your thoughts to drift, carried by the slow, steady rhythm of this ancient world. The vastness of the Sahara, once a barrier, now feels like a comforting expanse, connecting distant lands and times. The quiet resilience of the Sonic people, their deep connection to the land and their ancestors, offers a sense of grounding, a timeless wisdom. There's no need to hold on tightly to any specific image or fact now. Just let them flow, like a calm river, carrying you gently downstream. The Ghana Empire, in its quiet majesty, has shared its story with you, and now it's time for it to fade, leaving behind only the softest imprint. Feel the warmth, the peace, and the comforting weight of a history well told. Let your breath deepen, your body relax, and your mind quiet as you drift into a peaceful rest.